This is a video lecture for week 5 of the Humanities 1 course. Um, there are several questions this week that I thought were interesting. Probably the most difficult one is this, and it goes back to the question that I asked you for your short essay. More than a few people asked me what I thought about why Buddhism and Christianity arose at the same exact time. And like I said in the question, this idea of synchronicity, of why certain things seem to happen around the world at the same point in time, is something that puzzles people. It really does. Um, Historians don't know really what to make of this. Um, Now, what I think is that uh, all of humanity seems to be moving in a certain way. You can see a general trend of development in human thought and in societies. Um, and so these things can kind of coincide because the time is ripe for this kind of thing to happen. When the world is ready, this stuff takes place. So, a lot of people were working on flight, for instance. Leonardo da Vinci in the Renaissance designed a flying machine that would have actually worked if he had something to power it with. So that's how brilliant Leonardo da Vinci was. But people were working on this, and the Wright brothers just happened to figure out some of the basic, important elements of powered flight uh, that other people were just about to find out too. They just got there a little bit first. But the French had an airplane in the air that couldn't turn, so they were having troubles with that. But it could go up and it could go down and go in a straight line, but that's about it. And so you see this happening where you have these simultaneous occurrences. Um, Now let's look at just what religion was before Buddhism and Christianity came on the scene. You had paganism basically, and we talked about what paganism was like, and it's very, very different from Buddhism and Christianity in a very uh, direct way. Um, in pagan antiquity, you could believe in all the gods, some of the gods, none of the gods. Um, Paganism was kind of a general trend of religious expression, but there were people who didn't believe in the gods at all. Um, the end of Jason and the Argonauts, the epic story of mythology, where he goes and gets the golden fleece. Now there are several movies about this, but in the end, the last thing Jason says is there are no gods. He despairs of there being gods. People were asking themselves this question, and so paganism was, a way of expressing a certain religious sentiment in humanity, but it didn't have anything definite about it. It was just kind of this free-for-all of temples and deities and rituals and beliefs. It was kind of a smorgasbord of things that you could possibly latch onto as religious expression. Now, Christianity and Buddhism are very different from this because they offer a definite destination for the spiritual journey. For Buddhists, it's nirvana. It's the state of enlightenment, becoming uh, free from the illusions and delusions of the mind and of life. And um, for Christianity, it's heaven. It's the state of and also with heaven and with enlightenment, you have this kind of progress. C.S. Lewis said and he was a famous Christian theologian, apologist, also wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. Um, he said that if someone goes to heaven, they will look back on their life and say it was all heaven from the beginning to now. It was a general progress towards more and more closeness with God. Um, and on the other hand, someone that goes to hell will look back on their life and say it was all hell. It was all downhill. Um, and so there's this general progress. There's the idea that you can start here and you can end there. And you can achieve a kind of destination in the spiritual journey. And paganism lacked that. No one said they were getting closer and closer to Apollo. You know, it was just not part of pagan belief. And so it seems that the world was ready for that shift from corporate worship of all these various gods to a worship that's very focused on an individual spiritual journey with methods and roadmaps for how to attain that destination. And so the other thing that's similar about Christianity and Buddhism is they both have an idea of, well, Christianity calls it the fall of man and original sin. Buddhism talks about it in terms of the delusions of the mind. But both religions posit the idea that there's something desperately wrong with everybody, that we have a problem that has to be fixed. Paganism didn't do that. It didn't say, oh, people are generally messed up, but if they just worship Athena in the right way, this problem will be cured. And so paganism didn't deal with that issue. And when Christianity and Buddhism came along and said, listen, guys, there's something wrong with human beings, you know, the world said, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Look at what's going on. Look at life. Look at history. Something's up here. And so Buddhism and Christianity both posit something wrong with humanity and a definite way to fix that which is wrong. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons they arise at the same time in history is because of this um, difference between Buddhism and Christianity. It was a new emphasis, a new motive in religion to fix what's wrong, and a new emphasis on the individual person's spiritual journey. Another question is about the uh, Gospels. There are a couple of questions here. One question is that about your book explains the reasoning for Mark and John in terms of the animals, you know, that are symbols of these Gospels. But the book didn't explain why one of the Gospels that represents a man and the other one's represented by an ox. The answer to that is the man represents the reaching out to God through reason, the idea that people can, by their actions, draw closer to God. And the ox is a symbol of strength and also of sacrifice. An ox was one of the major sacrifices in the Hebrew tradition. You know, your oxes are really important animals in an agrarian culture. They're the ones that pull the plows. And to sacrifice an ox was a big deal. And so the ox and also the ox represented, you know, the strongest animal that was domesticated. So strength and sacrifice are what the ox symbolizes. Another question: what did Constantine do to spread Christianity other than the Edict of Milan? Um, the answer is not a whole lot. He kind of changed as his life as he got older. He became more and more on the side of Christianity and began to say some pretty disparaging things about the pagans. But when Constantine became emperor, he had an enormous population of Christians and an enormous population of pagans that he had to rule. And one of the ways he did this was by kind of instituting a sort of religious tolerance. Um, Christianity was no longer to be persecuted, but it wasn't officially meant to be um, forced upon everyone else. And so under Constantine, you could worship the gods, or you could worship the God of Christianity. You could worship any god you wanted to. Christians just couldn't be persecuted. And as time went by, and you know, there's this kind of tumultuous history of early Christianity where various emperors would either try to institute paganism again or reinforce Christianity. But that came later. And one of the things to know about Constantine is that he did not accept baptism until he was on his deathbed. And a lot of people think that the reason for this is political, that he just, in order to be the emperor of the pagans as well as the Christians, he couldn't just go all the way to the other side. And so he waited until he was on his deathbed before he was baptized. And so Basically what Constantine did was he stopped the persecution and suppression of Christianity, and which caused Christianity to kind of explode because the empire had been trying to keep a lid on Christianity for a while, unsuccessfully. Um, some of the major changes that happened under Constantine, though, can be seen as the Christianization of Roman culture. The gladiatorial combats were abolished. Um, Infanticide was outlawed. Infanticide was a common thing in um, Roman life. It's one of the things, remember we talked about this class? Maybe another class where we talked about cultural blind spots. Um, Cultures seem to have these things that they do that are just, we look back and go, that's terrible. But to them, it was just fine. Nobody thought about it much. But if you had a kid, a child that you did not want in the ancient world, one of the things, the tradition was you just take it out and leave it somewhere, leave the child out in the wilderness. You're not really committing murder. Kid might be okay, but it was murder. And that's why a lot of old fairy tales and stuff, Hansel and Gretel, the kids are left out in the woods. This was something that happened in the ancient world. And with Constantine, that ends. He says, no, we're not doing that anymore. You can kind of see a gradual awakening in Roman society of the idea of the dignity of human life, that certain things we just shouldn't be doing, and watching people be killed for entertainment and taking children out and leaving them to die in the wilderness are not okay anymore. And so in that way, Constantine began to kind of make the morality of Christianity a part of Roman law. Um, Another question about the Gospels is, which one's oldest? What's the oldest Gospel? And this question is a little fraught with confusion because there's a lot of Gospels out there. We have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Bible. But there's a Gospel of Nicodemus, there's a Gospel there's even a Gospel of Judas. There's all these different Gospels. You can look them up and read them. And there's some question, why in the world did we pick Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Why was that picked by Christianity? And these other Gospels not? Which one's the oldest? Were they, there are a lot of scholars that question whether or not the Gospels were even written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't have a lot of patience for that. It seems that when I look into that kind of scholarship, they're kind of clutching at straws. It looks to me like they kind of make up their mind already that the Gospels couldn't have been written by the people whose names are on them. And so then they look for reasons to back that up. That, they start off with the assumption that these books could not have been written by their traditional authors. And so, I don't see a lot of evidence to say that these weren't written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, three of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called Synoptic Gospels, and they tell the same events pretty much in the same order in Jesus' life, and sometimes with the same words. And there's some speculation that all three of those Gospels relied on another Gospel that we have lost, that they looked back to that earlier compilation of the life of Jesus to write their Gospels. But we don't know. But they do share a lot of similarities. And then John is different. It just isn't the same as the others. And but all of them internally have evidence for a very early date. Jerusalem was sacked and destroyed by Rome in AD 70. And all the Gospels describe Jerusalem is still standing. They talk about, features of Jerusalem's city and its landscape that are no longer there after the Romans come through and destroy everything. And so Matthew is regarded traditionally by Christianity as the oldest of the Gospels. But once again, it's something that we really don't know which was first. Let's see. The last question I want to tackle is about polygamy. The Islamic tradition of allowing more than one wife. And also, when you look back in prehistory, this was the way marriage was done forever. This idea of one man, one woman is that arises really with Christianity in the world. Prior to that, people collecting wives was just the way things were done. You know, Abraham had many wives. Solomon had hundreds. And so Jesus comes along and he basically says that's not the way it should be. He harkens back to Eden. He says in the beginning, um, God created man and woman, one man, one woman, and that was his plan. And that this other stuff that's happened around marriage is not in keeping with God's perfect design. And so, um, one of the reasons that polygamy is no longer um, okay in the Western civilization is because a lot of our morality is based on Christianity. Um, Now, once again, I don't have much patience with people who are very insistent that the Bible says that marriage is between one man and one woman and are against gay marriage for that reason because they leave off something really important. Jesus did talk about a marriage being between one man and one woman, but he also said it was forever. Um, there's not much wiggle room in the Gospels for the idea of divorce. And so, to me, it seems that many people are just picking the parts of Jesus' commandments about marriage that are convenient. Um, I have yet to see someone being very militant about outlawing divorce. Um, and to be consistent, if we're going to be against gay marriage for religious reasons, then we have to be against divorce as well. Otherwise, we're just kind of, like I said, picking what we find uh, most palatable of Jesus' commandments on that subject. And so uh, this idea that people shouldn't have lots and lots of wives comes from that. Now, there are some pretty important reasons why polygamy is against the law in this country. You know, one of the things when the gay marriage decision was handed down by the Supreme Court and gay marriage became legal in the United States, um, people who were really against that said, well, this is the first step towards legalizing polygamy. And uh, what the Supreme Court basically said, and what the courts that struck down bans on gay marriage said, was that the state has to provide a compelling reason for a law. If a law is going to prescribe something, say this group of people cannot do X, Y, or Z, it can't just be because the Bible says so. There has to be some kind of compelling reason to do that. And the court couldn't find a compelling secular reason for not allowing gay people to be married. Um, but with polygamy, there is a lot of good research that says that cultures that do this don't do so well. Um, what you end up with in a polygamous culture is a few wealthy men collecting all of the women available, and you end up with a whole lot of unmarried young men. And unmarried young men are not a real positive influence in most societies. Um, and so you can see some definite harm that comes from that. And the other thing is that it's always men collecting women. It's never women collecting men. Where polygamy is allowed, the rights of women are generally not very good. And you don't see any kind of reciprocity when it comes to multiple spouses in that way. You don't see wealthy, powerful women marrying up all the men and leaving all the young women with no one to marry. And so there's kind of a built-in sexism that comes with that kind of social construct. And that is that. I want to talk a little bit about the article review. I've set up the instructions for it. I'll put a little more information about that out when I get the week 6 unit up, when you'll be able to submit that. So be working on that. Yeah, I've tried to make it fairly simple and fairly easy, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on formatting and so forth and so on. A lot of that stuff is should have been covered in a comp class. If you have questions, please, let me know, and I will try to answer them. But I'm hoping that we can all give this a shot, and I'm not going to ask for a rough draft. This is, just hand it in, and let's see how it does. or how we do. And that is that.